Two kennel techs stood at the far end of the run, with their coffee going cold, watching Marissa Pennington pace the gravel with her phone pressed to her ear and her run sheet clipped to a board against her hip. A dog with no orders left to follow is still holding a line nobody gave him, and the ground he is guarding has never once been dug up to see why. 9 days now. 9 days of a Belgian Malinois, planted square across his own kennel gate, refusing the bowl set 6 inches from his nose, refusing the cot dragged out for him, refusing the hands of every technician who had tried, gently, at all hours, to walk him back inside. Liability posture, Marissa said into the phone, loud enough to carry across 2 runs and into the office trailer. Textbook, fear-based territorial guarding, first documented 96 hours ago, no material change since. I'm not going to sit on this and call it loyalty, because it looks nice on camera. She listened, nodded at nothing, tapped the corner of the run sheet against her knuckles. Right. I'll have the recommendation finalized before the board sits. The numbers are the numbers. If a dog you loved ever refused to leave a spot for reasons you couldn't name, you already know where this story is going. The two techs didn't say anything to each other for a while. One of them, a kid named Dylan who'd been on staff 4 months, finally spoke without looking away from the gate. He hasn't laid down once, not even to sleep. He sleeps standing, the other said. I watched him do it at 2 in the morning, eyes open half the time. Barley held the threshold, the way a sentry holds a checkpoint nobody has told him to abandon. Forelegs set wide, weight low and even, ears swiveling to track every sound in the yard, without ever releasing his stare from the gravel seam at his feet. He was 11 years old, gray coming up thick through the muzzle, an old scar cording down one shoulder where the fur had never grown back right. None of that mattered to his stance. His stance was the stance of a much younger animal with much clearer orders. Marissa clicked her phone dark and studied the dog for a long moment, the way a person studies a problem that has already been solved on paper and only needs to be enacted. Behind her, taped to the corkboard in the office window, hung the fiscal year calendar with a single red circle drawn around a date that had, until 2 days ago, been 10 days out. It was 3 now. Someone upstream of her had moved a board vote, and moved it early, and she had learned about it the same way everyone else had. A memo forwarded without comment, landing in her inbox like a door closing somewhere she couldn't see. She did not know yet what was under the gravel. Nobody currently standing in that yard did. Not the techs, not Marissa, not even Kira Weston, who had clocked in 20 minutes ago and was already crouched at the fence line, trying to coax Barley's eyes toward her without success. What she knew was what her run sheet told her. 9 days, 1 animal, 1 recommendation due, 1 deadline, now folded down to 3. What none of them knew, and what the dog seemed to know with a certainty that made the humans around him look, by comparison, half blind, was that there was a reason for the exact paving stone he stood over, and it had nothing to do with fear. Kira straightened up, brushed the gravel dust from her knees, and looked past Marissa toward the perimeter fence, where an old man in a faded barn coat had just let himself in through the side gate with a watering can in one hand, moving like he'd done it 1,000 times before, like the kennel and its 9-day crisis were no more his concern than the weather. Kira noticed him the way you notice a shape that doesn't match its background, not because he was loud, but because everything else in the yard was. He came through the side gate without knocking, without announcing himself to the office trailer, carrying a battered galvanized watering can that looked older than she was. His coat had gone the color of a fence board left 5 winters in the weather, open over a collared shirt buttoned to the throat even in the heat, and he walked toward the lilac line planted along the outer wall, like a man walking to an appointment he'd never once missed. He didn't look at the kennels. That was the first strange thing. Every visitor who came through that gate, donors, board members, the occasional reporter chasing a soft story about veterans and dogs, looked at the kennels first, hungry for the animals, for the good feeling the animals were supposed to hand them. This man walked past 4 runs of barking, working, grieving dogs without turning his head, and knelt instead at the base of 6 lilac bushes gone leggy and unpruned along the fence, and began to water them, one at a time, in an order that looked memorized. Kira had been on staff 18 months. She thought she'd cataloged every regular who came through that gate. She had not cataloged him. "Who's that?" she asked Dylan, low, not wanting to break whatever quiet the old man had brought in with him. Dylan shrugged. "Comes every Sunday, has since before I started, waters the flowers, doesn't ask to see the dogs, doesn't sign the visitor log half the time. Somebody said once he planted them himself, way back. Nobody's ever asked him why? Would you?" She looked back at the old man, at the careful, unhurried way he tipped the can, and noticed that his right shoulder didn't lift when he reached. He squared his whole body toward the bushes instead, turning at the hips rather than twisting from the waist, like the shoulder simply wasn't available to him, past a certain angle, and hadn't been for a long time. He didn't favor it in any way that looked like pain. He just built a different way of moving around it, the way a man builds a bridge around a washed-out road and stops thinking of the old road at all. From his coat pocket, when he crouched lower to reach the last bush, something shifted and nearly slipped free. A coiled length of leather, dark with age and handling, no longer than a forearm, cinched with a bit of waxed cord. He caught it before it fell, tucked it back down into the pocket with the unthinking economy of a man checking that his keys are still there, and went on watering. Kira might have let the whole thing pass. Sunday regulars were not her concern, and she had a report to finish on an animal who hadn't slept in 9 days, except that Barley, from clear across the yard, from his fixed and locked down post at the gate he had refused to leave for going on 200 hours, turned his ears. Not his head, not his stance, just his ears, swiveling in smooth unison toward the fence line and the sound of water striking dry soil, tracking the old man's slow progress down the row of lilacs, the way another dog might track a bird crossing overhead. His eyes stayed on the gravel seam at his feet, but something in him had registered an arrival that mattered, before anyone had said a word, before anyone had made an introduction, before the old man had so much as glanced in the kennel's direction. Kira watched the dog's ears, and then watched the man, and felt the specific, quiet unease of noticing a fact too early to know what to do with it. "He waters that same fence line every week," she said again, mostly to herself, "and never asks to see the dogs." 8 years, Dylan said. 8 years, Dylan confirmed, not looking up from his clipboard, since before the retirement program even had a real budget. Guess some habits outlast the reason for them. Kira thought, watching Barley's ears settle again, at rest but not at ease, that Dylan might have that backward. Some habits, she was beginning to suspect, outlast nothing at all. They simply wait, patient as gravel, for the reason to come walking back through the gate. Marissa Pennington's morning had already gone well once before it went badly, and it was worth remembering that, because competence rarely announces itself before it's needed. 2 hours before she ever laid eyes on the old man in the barn coat, she had been crouched in run 14 with a young shepherd named Rye, running her fingers along his hind leg while a technician held the leash slack, and she had found what 3 other people had missed, a hitch in the stride that wasn't behavioral at all, a subtle heat along the stifle that her run sheet's palpation protocol was built exactly to catch. She'd called it a partial ligament strain, recommended imaging before any further conditioning work, and been right, confirmed an hour later by the visiting vet tech with a scan and a low whistle of respect. That was the job Marissa Pennington had built a career on, a method, applied without deviation, that found what needed finding. She trusted it the way other people trusted a level or a plumb line, and for 14 dogs out of 15, the trust was earned. So when she came around the corner of the office trailer 40 minutes later and found an old man in a faded canvas coat standing at the kennel gate, close enough to Barley's fixed position to make her stomach drop with the specific dread of a liability she hadn't scheduled, her first read was fast, practiced, and entirely wrong. "Who let a visitor back here unescorted?" she said, not to him, but past him, to Dylan, who had trailed along behind her clutching his clipboard like a shield. "We've got board members walking this property in 72 hours. I don't need a stranger standing at the one enclosure with an active behavioral flag. She didn't lower her voice for the old man's benefit. She said it the way you'd note an item on a list, flat and administrative, a fact to be corrected rather than a person to be addressed. Walk him back to the visitor lot, she told Dylan. We don't need a complication today. The old man didn't answer her, because she hadn't asked him anything. He stood with his weight settled evenly on both feet, watching Barley the way a man watches weather come in over a ridge, patient and unsurprised, and said nothing at all, while Dylan shifted his clipboard and looked, miserably, like he'd rather be anywhere else in the county. Sir, Dylan started, I'm just going to need you to head on back toward the... I know the way, the old man said, plain, not sharp. He didn't move. Marissa exhaled through her nose, the particular exhale of someone whose morning has one crisis too many stacked into it, and turned her attention back to the clipboard she'd been carrying since sunrise, as if the matter were settled by her having addressed it at all. She had a board vote in 3 days instead of 10, a placement recommendation to finalize on an animal who had not eaten in 9 days, and now an unaccounted-for old man standing at the exact gate she needed calm and empty for the site walkthrough. None of it registered to her as anything but noise stacking on noise. She had a method for noise. The method was to keep moving. She did not look at him again. That was the whole of the encounter. From her side of it, a policy line delivered to a subordinate, a problem filed and forgotten, a woman who believed, with the same confidence that had found the hitch in Rye's stride an hour before, that she had correctly diagnosed this situation too, and could move on to the next one. She was already 3 strides gone toward the office trailer, already dictating a note to herself about tightening the visitor log, when Barley did something he had not done in 9 full days for anyone else who had stood at that gate. He huffed. One low breath pushed out hard through his nose, not a growl and not a whine, a sound with no aggression in it at all, aimed at no one, simply a sound an old soldier makes when someone he's been waiting for finally arrives, and there is, as yet, no way to say so. Marissa didn't hear it, or didn't register it as anything other than a Malinois breathing. Dylan heard it, and went very quiet. And Kira, coming around the corner in time to catch the tail end of the whole exchange, saw the old man's face for the first time, unbothered, unhurried, watching the dog instead of the woman who had just tried to have him removed, and thought, with a small, cold certainty she couldn't yet explain to anyone, that whatever Marissa Pennington's run sheet had told her about that gate, it hadn't told her the whole of it. He didn't argue, and that was the second thing Kira noticed about him, after the shoulder. He simply crossed to the low stone wall across from the gate, the same wall the techs used to sit on during smoke breaks, and lowered himself onto it with the unhurried care of a man who had learned exactly how his knees wanted to be treated, and stayed there. Dylan came back twice in the next hour, each time a little more apologetic than the last, and each time the old man answered him the same way, without rising, without producing so much as a name. Sir, I really do need you to move along. We've got the board walkthrough coming and... He's not guarding the gate, the old man said, watching Barley rather than Dylan. He's guarding what's under it. There's a difference, and it matters which one you write down. Dylan didn't have an answer for that. He retreated to the office trailer to report that the visitor still hadn't left, and hadn't given his name, and had said something about the dog that Dylan didn't fully understand and wasn't sure he was supposed to repeat. Marissa herself came out an hour after that, clipboard in hand, her patience gone thin and precise as wire. She stopped in front of the wall, close enough that her shadow crossed his boots, and said, "Sir, I'll need to see some identification if you're going to remain on the property during an active evaluation period." He looked up at her, and there was nothing in his face that resembled defiance. "Don't carry any," he said. "Haven't needed to prove who I am to get near that gate in a long while." He didn't reach for a wallet he didn't have, didn't offer an excuse, didn't ask her name in return. He simply let the silence stretch until it became her problem to end, and she ended it by turning on her heel and walking back toward the trailer with her run sheet clutched a little tighter than before. It was Kira who came and sat near him, not on the wall itself, but on an overturned feed bucket a few feet off, telling herself she was on a break and that watching an unexplained old man was as good a use of 15 minutes as any. She had brought her own clipboard, half out of habit and half because she'd started, 2 days ago, keeping her own notes on Barley, separate from the official file. Notes nobody had asked for, and nobody had read. "He hasn't eaten in 9 days, she said, mostly to fill the quiet. "We've tried 4 different foods. Hand-fed twice. He won't take any of it near the gate." "He's not hungry where he's standing," the old man said. "He's on post. Man on post doesn't break for lunch." "You think it's trained behavior, not distress." "Didn't say it wasn't distress," he said. "Said it was trained first. Distress came in on top of it, when nobody understood the training and started trying to move him off it." Kira looked at the dog again, at the specific, unwavering geometry of his stance, and made herself really look this time, instead of simply cataloging it for a report. Barley's weight sat forward over his front pads, forepaws spread at an angle she'd have called defensive, if she hadn't been watching him hold that exact angle, unchanged, for the better part of 200 hours. His hindquarters were tucked, not slack, loaded, the way a dog loads before a controlled advance rather than a flinch. And his eyes, when she traced their line all the way down from his lowered head, were fixed on a single paving stone in the gravel threshold, not the whole gate, not the yard, not any of the people moving through it. One stone. The same one, every time she'd checked over the last 2 days, whether he was standing at 2 in the afternoon or 2 in the morning. "He's not looking at us at all," she said slowly. "He's looking at the ground." "He's been looking at the ground for 9 days, the old man said. "Question worth asking isn't what's wrong with him, it's what's under that stone that he thinks still needs holding." Kira wrote that down, word for word, in her own private notebook, and did not yet know that the words themselves would become a problem before they became an answer. He rose from the wall the way a man rises when the waiting is finished, rather than when his knees allow it, squaring his body toward the gate instead of turning his head, and crossed the yard with a walk that favored nothing you could point to and everything you could sense. Kira followed 2 steps behind, close enough to see, and Dylan came out of the trailer at a jog, already saying something about identification and property access that nobody was listening to anymore. At the threshold, Barley did not move aside. He did not growl either. He simply held, the way he had held for 200 hours, and let the old man come to within a foot of him before either one of them acknowledged the other. "Forepaws splayed 30 degrees off-center," the old man said, low, almost to himself, reading the dog the way another man might read a gauge. "Weight forward, not back. That's not fear. Fear sets a dog's weight low and behind the shoulders, ears independent of the eyeline, tracking the yard while the eyes stay locked. That's a sentry hold. That's a dog who's been told to watch a fixed point and hasn't been told to stop." He crouched, slow, favoring the shoulder without seeming to think about it, until he was level with the dog's head, and set his palm flat and open a few inches from Barley's muzzle, not reaching in, simply offering the shape of a hand and letting the dog decide what to do with it. "He hasn't broken stance for water in 9 days, Kira said behind him, quiet, almost a warning. "He's not going to break it for water," the old man said. "Water's not what he thinks he's protecting." For a long moment, nothing happened at all, and the whole yard seemed to hold with it. Dylan, frozen mid-stride, Marissa's shape visible now in the trailer doorway, arrested by something she couldn't yet name. Then Barley's stare, fixed for 9 days on one paving stone in the gravel, lifted. His head turned, slow, deliberate, and his eyes found the old man's face and held there the way a compass needle holds north, once it's finally allowed to settle. He leaned. It not lunged, not scrambled, leaned, the whole considerable weight of him, forward and down, until his skull came to rest against the old man's open palm, and the tension that had held his body rigid for 200 hours ran out of him, like water, finding the low ground at last. His legs didn't fully unlock. He didn't lie down. But for the first time in 9 days, Barley's weight went into a hand instead of into the gate, and the sound he made low in his chest was not the huff from before, but something longer, something almost like relief learning, slowly, that it was allowed. "There it is," the old man said, so quietly that only Kira, closest behind him, caught it at all. "There you are." The mystery didn't close there. If anything, it opened wider, because now there was a dog leaning into a stranger's hand instead of guarding a gate, and still nobody but the two of them had any idea what lay beneath that one paving stone, or why an old man in a faded coat had known, on sight, exactly how to ask. The board's vote moved up on a Tuesday afternoon, and it moved the way these things always seem to at Cutbank Ridge, quietly, on paper, in a memo nobody remembered requesting. Kira heard about it from Dylan, who'd heard it from the office manager, who'd forwarded an email meant for someone else. The fiscal year roster review, originally set for 10 days out, had been folded into an emergency session set for Thursday morning. 3 days. The reason given was budget alignment. The reason nobody said out loud was that a private placement contractor had a transport slot opening that week, and slots like that didn't wait on sentiment. Kira had meant her notes as a gift. She'd typed up 2 days of careful observation, the fixed stance, the single paving stone, the way Barley's whole posture had changed the moment the old man's hand met his skull, and sent it up the chain as supporting material for the board's review, certain that data, once someone actually looked at it, would speak for itself. It came back to her by way of an assistant director's clipped reply, forwarded without much comment. Report suggests handler-dependent instability requiring specialized intervention, recommend expedited placement to reduce liability exposure. Her careful record of a dog's vigil had been read, cleanly and reasonably, as evidence that the dog could not function without a stranger's touch, that his stability was borrowed rather than restored. She had built the strongest case for Barley she knew how to build, and it had been filed as the strongest case against him. She sat with that for the better part of an hour before she could bring herself to tell Elwood. She had a name for him now, offered plainly when she'd finally asked, no ceremony to it. Elwood Fenno. Said the way a man states a fact rather than an introduction, and when she did, he took it the way he seemed to take everything, without surprise and without much visible weight added to what he was already carrying. "They'll read it the way they're built to read it," he said. "Paper only says what the form lets it say." "Then we need something the form can't argue with," Kira said. "Records, whatever's actually under that stone. If we can show the board there's a reason, a real one, on paper, from before." "There's paper," Elwood said. "There was a transfer order, 9 years back. Ought to be filed somewhere with my name on the correction." It took Kira the better part of a day, 3 phone calls to the regional archive office, and a favor from a records clerk who owed her nothing but did it anyway, to learn that the transfer order existed, buried 3 systems deep in a database, migrated twice since it was filed, and that it did not carry Elwood Fenno's name at all. A clerical error 9 years old, never caught, because no one had ever gone looking for it, had filed the record under a different handler entirely, a man who'd rotated out of the unit 2 years before the incident it described had even happened. "It's not you," she told him, reading it off her laptop screen at the low wall. "The paperwork doesn't exist under your name. As far as any record we can produce is concerned, you were never there." Elwood took that in without much change in his face, though something in the set of his jaw suggested the news cost him more than his voice let on. "Wasn't looking to be on a record," he said, "but I need something under that gravel to answer for itself before Thursday, and I can't produce a piece of paper the system's decided belongs to somebody else." Marissa, unaware of any of it, the buried order, the misfiled name, the widening gap between what Kira knew and what she could prove, spent that same Tuesday afternoon finalizing her recommendation with the particular relief of someone who believes a difficult decision has just gotten simpler. The kennel technician's report, forwarded to her secondhand, read exactly the way she'd expected an amateur's field notes to read. Sentiment mistaken for data, an old man's presence mistaken for a cure. It confirmed, if anything, what her own run sheet had told her from day one. She clipped a fresh copy to her board, drew a neat line through Barley's case number, and wrote, in the margin, A single word that would look, to anyone reviewing it Thursday morning, like the responsible conclusion of a thorough process. Expedite. She had no way of knowing that the man she'd told a subordinate to walk off the property 3 days earlier had spent 22 years finding exactly the kind of evidence her run sheet had no field to hold, and that the ground under Barley's feet was about to make her word look, very shortly, like the least accurate thing she had ever written down. Colonel Weldon Overby arrived on Thursday morning in a county sedan that nobody at Cutbank Ridge had been told to expect before 9 o'clock, and stepped out onto the gravel with a folder tucked under one arm and the unhurried economy of a man who had spent 40 years learning not to waste motion. He was 68, silver-headed, dressed in a windbreaker, with no insignia on it at all, and the office staff, who greeted him at the trailer door, treated his visit as what the calendar said it was, a routine oversight inspection, scheduled months ago, entirely separate from whatever was happening at Gate 3. Marissa met him with her run sheet already in hand, already rehearsing, in the front of her mind, the language she'd use to walk him through the Barley recommendation should it come up, clean, procedural, defensible. She had no reason to think his visit concerned that case at all. The scheduling memo she'd been given listed his purpose as a standard review of the nonprofit's outside placement partnerships, a box-checking exercise the board ran every 18 months. It was not, as it turned out, a box-checking exercise. Colonel Overby had spent the better part of 2 weeks quietly reviewing the placement contractor's fee structure, the same contractor whose transport slot had, indirectly, moved Barley's board vote up from 10 days to 3, and had found what he'd come looking for, a retention arrangement tied to reduced roster counts, structured so that a director who moved dogs off the books faster earned a bonus scaled to how many she moved. It was not illegal. It was, in the flat language of his own notes, a conflict of interest dressed as an efficiency, and it had been quietly shaping recommendations across the whole program for longer than anyone on the board had noticed. He was midway through explaining this to Marissa, folder still closed under his arm, when he rounded the corner toward Gate 3 and stopped walking altogether. Elwood was crouched again at the threshold, one hand resting on Barley's neck, and did not look up right away. It was Overby who went still first, not the practiced stillness of a man listening, but something closer to a held breath, a full 3 seconds where his mouth opened around the start of a sentence and produced nothing at all. "Fenno," he said finally, and set the folder down on the low stone wall, rather than opening it, both hands suddenly empty and unsure what to do with themselves. "Elwood Fenno." Elwood rose, squaring his body the way he always did, and looked at the old Marine across the gravel, with no particular surprise in his face, only the plain recognition of a debt about to be spoken aloud after 9 years of silence. "Colonel," he said. "You're supposed to be dead to this program," Overby said, and there was no lightness in it at all. "Or retired clean off the map, at least. That's how I left it. That's how I made sure it stayed." Marissa looked between the two of them, her run sheet suddenly feeling like a very thin thing to be holding. "There was a transfer crate, 9 years back," Overby said, not to her, though she was the one who needed to hear it. "A dog slated for destruction, under a fitness protocol, that never should have applied to him. Somebody turned that crate around without authorization, and never filed a word about it. I found out within a week. I had the choice to report it or bury it, and I buried it, because the man who did it had spent 22 years quietly doing exactly that kind of thing for dogs nobody else was willing to fight for, and I decided the debt belonged to this program, not to him." He looked at Elwood now, and something in his face had gone unmistakably older in the last 10 seconds. "I never told you I knew. I should have. That's on me, not on you." Marissa found her voice, thin at first. "Are you saying the incident under review, the one you're here for?" "I'm saying your placement math," Overby said, turning to her at last, "has never once had a field in it for what that dog is standing over. And I'm saying the fee arrangement I came here to look at is the same one that moved your deadline up from 10 days to 3. 2 separate wrongs, Ms. Pennington. Only one of them was ever yours." Nobody moved to open the folder. For a long moment, the only sound in the yard was Barley's breathing, low and steady, and the particular silence of an institution beginning, slowly, to understand what it had been standing on. The gravel came up easy, once someone finally thought to lift it, the way things that have waited a long time tend to come up easy when their moment finally arrives. Dylan and a second technician worked with hand trowels under Overby's quiet direction, careful as archaeologists, while Marissa stood at the edge of the excavation with her run sheet held loose at her side, no longer certain what column any of this belonged in. Barley did not need to be restrained. He stood a few feet back, tail low and still, watching the ground come open at last, with the settled patience of a sentry finally being relieved. What they found, 8 inches down, was a tin no bigger than a cigarette case, rusted at the seams, but sealed tight, wrapped once in oilcloth gone stiff with age. Elwood didn't crouch to retrieve it himself. He waited until Dylan lifted it free and held it out, and only then did he take it, turning it once in his hands before working the lid with a thumbnail worn flat from a lifetime of exactly that motion. Inside was a single discharge tag, stamped and worn, the metal gone the soft gray of long handling. Not Barley's, a different dog's name pressed into it, a name none of them recognized, and beneath the name, a service number and a date 9 years old. His name was Anvil, Elwood said, and it was the most words he had strung together at once in 9 days at that kennel, and everyone in the yard, even Marissa, went quiet to let him finish. Belgian Malinois, same litter line as this one here. Near enough. Fitness Board 4 ranks up from where I stood decided his hips wouldn't hold another year of field work, and wrote him down for destruction rather than retirement, because destruction was cheaper on that quarter's numbers. I'd handled him myself 2 years running. I knew what those hips could still do, and what they couldn't, better than any protocol sheet written by somebody who never once walked him. He turned the tag over once, the way a man checks a coin he already knows the weight of. Crate came through on a Thursday morning, same as today. I signed for it and I didn't put him in it, loaded an empty crate instead, waited it to pass inspection, and walked Anvil out the side gate myself, off the books, and placed him with a rancher 40 miles east, who asked no questions and kept none. He lived out 6 good years on that man's land. I never told a soul, because telling would have cost this program its accreditation over one old handler's disobedience, and I judged the dog's life worth more than my name staying clean. He set the tin down on the low stone wall, beside the folder Overby still hadn't opened. Barley wasn't guarding a body, he said. He was guarding the only proof that Anvil ever existed, past that Thursday. I buried it here myself, the day I placed him, because I didn't trust an office file to keep a secret the way gravel does. Didn't tell the dog to watch it, he worked it out himself, same as he worked out most things I never had to teach him twice. His voice, plain the whole way through, didn't rise now either, though something in it had gone very careful. I'm not looking for anything for it. Wasn't looking for it 9 years ago. All I'm asking is that whatever gets written down after today says plainly whose dog he is and whose he was, so the record stops lying about a debt this program never knew it owed. Marissa Pennington stood very still for a long moment, her run sheet hanging forgotten at her side, and when she finally moved, it was not toward the folder or the tin, but toward her own clipboard, propped against the office trailer wall since that morning. She picked up her pen, turned to the evaluation form she had used, unmodified, for 6 years, and beneath the column marked behavioral flags, and the column marked fitness for retention. She wrote, by hand, in the margin where no printed field existed, handler testimony, weighted equal to instrument data. She did not say anything as she wrote it. She did not need to. It was, in its way, the plainest apology in the yard. Colonel Overby, watching her write, finally opened his folder, not to read from it, but to slide the tin and its tag inside, gently, the way a man files something he intends to keep, rather than something he intends to bury again. The board vote never happened the way the memo had planned it. What happened instead, 3 weeks later, was quieter than any of them expected. a corrected file, a name restored, where a filing error had erased it, a placement fee arrangement dissolved without headlines, and a single line added to a program-wide evaluation form that would outlast every person standing in that yard the day the gravel came up. He had not come back for the dog. That was the part none of them, not Kira, not Marissa, not even Overby, ever fully said aloud, though it sat under the whole account like the tin had sat under the gravel. He had come back because the dog had never once, in 11 years, been wrong about a gate. Weeks later, on an ordinary Sunday, with nothing on the calendar to mark it, Elwood Fenno came through the side gate the same way he always had, watering can in hand, and found that the lilacs along the fence line had finally been cut back properly for the first time in longer than anyone at the kennel could remember. Someone, Kira, though she never claimed it, had trimmed the dead wood out and mulched the roots, and the bushes stood a little straighter for it, the way things do when somebody finally tends to them on purpose instead of out of habit alone. He watered them anyway, in the same order he always had, because Ruth had planted this line 30 years before any of this ground belonged to dogs or boards or run sheets, and some Sundays were for her and had nothing to do with anyone else at all. Barley found him there before he'd finished the third bush. No one had let the dog out. Someone had simply left the run gate standing open that morning, the way it stood open most mornings now, and Barley came across the yard at an easy, unhurried walk, no vigil left to keep, no ground left to guard, and pressed his shoulder against Elwood's leg, the way he used to, years back, before either of them had learned what 9 days of standing still could cost a body. Elwood set the can down and rested his good hand flat against the dog's neck, and for a while, neither of them did anything at all, which was, by then, its own kind of conversation. The gate at Run 3 stood open behind them in the low evening light, its latch unlatched, no crate coming through it, and none expected. Looped loose over that latch, left there by no one's particular decision, hung the old leather strap Elwood had once cut and stitched and marked, in his own hand, with a tally of every dog he'd ever fielded. It held nothing shut anymore. It didn't need to. Some debts get carried by the ones who can't explain why, until the ones who can finally come home. And in the last of that Sunday light, Barley lay down at last across the threshold of the open gate, not on guard now, but simply at rest, the strap resting easy beside him on the latch, and the ground beneath them both, for the first time in 11 years, asked nothing further of either one.